Welcome back to Crochet 6 Basics. Today we're going to be talking about how to work in rounds. So far in the course, we've only been working in rows. It's a little bit easier, but today we're going to start talking about how to work in rounds because that's pretty common for stuff like, stuffed animals or hats. Anything that is, round, generally worked in rounds. There's a couple different ways to start working in rounds. We're only going to focus on one today. And there's also a couple of different ways to continue your work once you're already in rounds, and we'll focus on a couple of those. So there's a little bit of variety, but for the sake of this course, just to get you started with working in rounds, we're only going to focus on a few of them. So the way that we're actually going to start our rounds is by starting with a slip knot. We're going to put that on our hook. And what we're going to do is we're going to chain one more than the turning chain for whatever stitch we're using. So for this example, I will be doing rounds in double crochet. So that means that we have a turning chain of 3. So 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to do one more. So remember how double crochet is worked into the 4th chain from your hook? That allows us to basically have a 1 stitch row for double crochet. Now, if we're working in rounds, what we're going to do is we're going to start our double crochet in the 4th chain from our hook. So there's 1 double crochet, but we're just going to keep putting double crochets into that 1st chain from our hook. We keep doing that. The pattern will tell you how many to do. Maybe it'll say 6, maybe it'll say 9. It's also dependent on the stitch. So usually rounds starting with single crochet start with 6, rounds starting with double crochet start with 9. And there's a couple different ways to do that. The pattern, again, there's a couple different ways to start working in rounds. This is probably the simplest one, so it's the one I'm focusing on for this course. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And you can see it's already curling in on itself and trying to close. This does leave a gap, and a pretty sizable one, but that's okay. Purposes of this course, it's not really critical, and if you're making a hat or something, there will kind of always be this gap in the top unless you use what's called a magic circle. But usually gaps in the top of the hat are covered up with like a pom-pom or something like that. So now that we've got our first round done, we're going to start talking about how to actually work in rounds once we get the first round done. So there's a couple different ways to do this, and there's a couple different ways that the second stitch stack pattern for the course, if you're following along with it, works into rounds as well. So the first one and the easiest one is with continuous rounds, where you kind of work in a spiral. When you're doing continuous rounds, it's best to add a stitch marker to either the first or the last stitch of your round. Usually I add mine to the last stitch of my round because it becomes very easy to lose track of where your rounds end. Like when you're working in rows, you kind of know these 2 spots are the ends of your rows and you just go back and forth. When you're working in spirals, it doesn't really work like that. But to work in continuous round, you're going to find the first stitch that you made, and you're literally just going to keep working into that. So continuous rounds work like this. I'm just going to put a single double crochet, just 1 double crochet in each of these stitches, just for now. This isn't going to lay flat, but we'll talk about increases and decreases in the next video, which will allow it to lay flat. But you can see that if we look at the tops of our stitches, they sort of just follow along. They just flow straight into that. This is the next stitch we work into, but it's still part of that same round. It becomes more obvious the more rounds you do. So if I look at the bottom of this cinch sack, which is worked in single crochet, it's a little bit hard to see with single crochet, but if I track it along with my hook, you can see that this is our spiral. If you follow along where my hook is, I'm not jumping up. There's no like jogs to reach up to the next row. So that's working in continuous spirals. A bit more common with single crochets than double crochets, but the other way to work that we're going to be looking at is turned rounds. With turned rounds, you're going to actually be slip stitching to the first stitch in your round, and then doing your turning chain, turning your work, and then working back. So this is a lot more like working in rows than continuous rounds is, because you are doing that turning chain and you're working back the way you came. and you can see that there is like a definite jog here. Like you can see here's the first round, and you can see, okay, there's our jump up to the second round, and now we're going here. If you were to look at something that actually is designed to lay flat, there's a few increases to make sure it does, but you would be it would be very easy to see where one round ends and the next round begins. So those are the two ways of working in rounds we will focus on for this course. And that is the one way of starting working in rounds we'll focus on. Again, it does leave a decent sized gap, but that's okay. This is the easiest way to start working in rounds, and it'll be useful for anything that's not stuffed animals. Obviously, you're not going to want that if you're making stuffed animals, but if you're getting into that, which is also called amigurumi, you're going to want to look into magic circles, which I will be doing a tutorial on some point in the future. But that's it for working in rounds for this video, and in the next one we will start talking about increasing and decreasing.